begin by honoring the Chumash and Tongva land. Let's honor the Chumash and Tongva people, stewards of this land. Let's move beyond honoring land to really just feeling the land. And I invite you to honor and acknowledge the indigenous land that you're on today and the people who were there before you, and acknowledging and understanding that things happened on this land before we all arrived, that this land has history and this land has stories. Let's do that. You know, I don't know the names of the sea vessels that brought my ancestral lineage to the United States of America. I don't know the indigenous land. I don't know the names of those places. I don't know. But I do know that my water is the Rio Guadalquivir of Sevilla, España, Seville, Spain, my birthplace. And I know my mountains are the Sierra Morena. And I know my people. My people are African. They're European, Irish, and English. And according to the Louisiana oral history of my family, we also are Oklahoma Choctaw. I know that my mother, is Marion Faye Callahan Harris, and that my father is Alvin Johnson, Sr. of Morgan City, Louisiana, and Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I know this. I know my elders, Johnson, Callahan, Walker, Harris, and I honor the Familia Santamaria as well. I know my Tane, my husband, my partner is Andres Santamaria, and my children are Kenya Pilar and Andres Julian. I know this. I know that the indigenous community that I work with, alongside, for, on behalf of, and to benefit are the Mixteco Indigena of Oaxaca, Mexico, who live right here in Oxnard, California. I know this. And I know all of these things. I know that I am Dr. Lorri, Minnie Rivers Johnson, Santamaria, Aho, Tenakoto, Tenakoto, Tenakoto Katoa. I know these things because my friends, my dear friends in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Maori, and Pacifica, taught me how to introduce myself in a way that is appropriate for a person of indigenous descent. They taught me many things. They taught me much about colonization, decolonization, and co-decolonization, but I get ahead of myself. They also taught me about healing. As a stage 4 cancer survivor, they taught me much about life and breath, and they brought me over, helped me make my way here to Oxnard to work with the Mixteco Indigena Community Organizing Project, to work with Curando el Alma, Healing the Soul, Nasana e Iñe, with Doña Alberta, with Sylvia, with Luisa, Mixteca women, with Adriana, with Claudia, with Liliana, Chicana women, Afro-Indigenous women, right here in Oxnard. And together, we continue the healing journey, and we use breath to clear what we all have right now in this moment, shared collective trauma, shared collective trauma coming out of the pandemic. Sickness, racial injustice, disparities, innumerable, disproportionately impacting Black and Indigenous people of color like myself and the Mixteco Indígena community right here. Would you believe me if I told you we can transmute some of this shared trauma? We can with breath. I invite you to take a deep breath with me now. Let's breathe to enable connection, to invoke some protection together. Let's create a little community. Let's breathe to make space for exception, to accept each other, to inspire some reflection in the next few minutes that we have together. Let's slow our heart rate. Let's move from fight and flight. Let's transmute. Let's go into relaxation, some recalibration, and some, hopefully, conciliation, not reconciliation, because something had to be right for us to reconcile, and some conciliation. Let's breathe with the trees, the lungs of our planet in climate distress. And let's breathe for those who can breathe no longer. Let's breathe for those who have lost their lives as a result of the last 16 months or so. Let's breathe for those who can breathe no longer because of racial injustice. Let's breathe. When I was 9 years old, I had a lunchbox. It was a Star Wars lunchbox. It was my favorite lunchbox, and it was embossed on the front. I can feel it now. I can feel the trace, the outline of Princess Leia and her power buns, and Luke. I think there were some lightsabers. There was a Millennial Falcon, and the inside there was a thermos. There was Yoda, not Baby Yoda, the Yoda. Loved this lunchbox. My mom would pack it with all kinds of delicious foods when I was 9-year-old me. And I really enjoyed my lunches, but every now and again, things went bad, and I did not eat the contents of the lunchbox, and I would chuck it under my bed or in the closet on a good day or best case scenario, over the weekend, worst case scenario, over the summer. At any rate, opening the lunchbox was an adventure. If you take a deep breath with me now, you can imagine, using all of your senses, what happened in the lunchbox over time. Things were rotten, they were moldy, they were disgusting, rancid even. Opening that lunchbox after a period of time reminds me a lot of the situation that I find myself in, that we find ourselves in this shared trauma moment. We have this discrimination, we have this racism, we have this homophobia right now. We have these disproportionate disparities, food insecurities. It's awful. It's palpable. We can feel it. We can smell it. We can taste it. It's all around us. It's our environment. And it really, truly is the impact of colonization. It's the impact of colonization, something put away at a point and just left to fester. Left to fester. This is part of our shared trauma. This is part of the trauma that we all share. It's bad enough that we have the pandemic. It's bad enough that we have social injustice. It's bad enough that boys, young children, are being accidentally murdered. It's bad enough that we had to watch George Floyd die in real time in social media. It's bad enough. But I want you to understand something about colonization. Colonization happened because folks came from Europe to here, to this country, and they were fleeing discrimination. They were fleeing racism. They were fleeing marginalization. They were traumatized. Traumatized folks arrived here. And what do you think they did? They traumatized the folks that they found. This trauma has been festering for years. Trauma that begot trauma, that begot trauma, that begot trauma. And here we are swimming in a sea of shared trauma, exacerbated by what? The opening of the lunchbox, the pandemic. I just need you to understand. You're probably thinking, colonization, Pilgrims, Indians, huh? What's it doing in a nice neighborhood like ours? Well, it's here. Let's take a moment. May our breath help us connect in this moment and accept the truth. All of us share the trauma. All of us have been impacted. I don't know a person in the world who has not been impacted by the last 20 months, I would say. It's getting, it's not over. We're still swimming in this sea of shared trauma, this shared trauma of hate, this shared trauma of discrimination, this shared trauma of sickness, of death. Things are getting better, but it's still around us, just like the after effects of colonization. But I need you to know that there's a disproportionate impact. Black and indigenous people of color are disproportionately impacted. We die more. We get sicker. We have more discrimination. 3 times more for indigenous folks like the Mixteco Indígena community that I work with. Black people are dying more. We're losing 3 years of life. 3 years of life, of total life, for the entire Black population in the United States of America. These atrocities are intense. They're intense. It is disproportionate. Yes, we are all suffering, but some of us are suffering more than others. And I say this is because of the after effects of colonization. And I know that we're smart, and I know that you're thinking, but America, we're awesome. We had a Black president. We have a vice president who is half Black and half Asian. What are you talking about, lady? We're moving. We're awesome. We've got things going. Yes, I agree that we do. And we even have something called decolonization, and I know because people are asking me to come and help them with decolonization, but we can't just decolonize. Colonizers can't decolonize. In fact, Linda Tuhiwai Smith, a renowned professor, indigenous Maori scholar, and expert on decolonization, she says that decolonization is when indigenous people rewrite our position in history. She says it's when indigenous people tell our own stories in our own versions, in our own ways, for our own purposes. Decolonization is an indigenous enterprise. It's not a mainstream situation. Everybody can't just become a decolonizer. It doesn't work like that. Decolonization is when Black and indigenous people of color work in their own communities like I have, where we rewrite and we rewrite our own places in history. As a Black indigenous woman of color, I've worked with Black women, and we have written different ways of existing in the world to counter misogyny, to counter racism, to counter institutional racism. Why do we write these things? In order to uplift our community. Very specific purposes. That's decolonization. Decolonization is when Doña Alberta, Luisa, and Sylvia, Mixteca women, work in their community to study indigenous healing methodologies, to study medicine, to benefit their community. It's when the Mixteco Indígena Community Organizing Project work in different ways for their community, on behalf of their community, to benefit their community. It's rewriting and rewriting. That's decolonization from within an indigenous community. May our breath create shared understanding that decolonization is an indigenous enterprise. And so where does that leave us? Where does it leave us? It leaves us with co-decolonization, my friends. Co-decolonization, spiritual activism. Co-decolonization is when me, you, any of us work with, for, on behalf of, alongside, and to benefit a Black indigenous community of color. It means we go when we're invited. It means we go when we're asked. It means we go when we're employed. It means that we are working alongside, in service to, or to the benefit of a Black or indigenous community of color. It means stepping aside one's ego. It means stepping aside one's privilege. It means stepping aside everything that you have. Not looking for reciprocity. No, back, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. None of that. It's I'm giving up a piece of myself in order to work for you, to work with you, for you, alongside and behalf. That is co-decolonization, and all of us are able to do this. I've done this in Arizona with Tohono O'odham, with Luiseño, with Dine. I've done it with Mexican American moms, Latinx community members, the LGBTQ plus community. I left behind. My mom told me when I was a kid, Lorri, we don't work, we don't live, we don't play in areas where there are a lot of black people, but you need to find people who are disproportionately impacted. Find people who are suffering. Find a place where you can take whatever little bit of privilege you've garnered along the way in your life, and you help, you serve, you work. And you know what? I'm very happy to say that I and you and we can step aside and work with, for, alongside, on behalf of, and to benefit other communities of color. Black, indigenous, people of color who are disproportionately impacted by the shared trauma. The shared trauma. Adriana, Liliana, and Claudia, Chicana, indigenous women, Afro-indigenous women, step aside themselves to work with the Mixteco Indígena Community Organizing Project. There are many, many who are able to do this. I want to invite you to process your shared trauma right now. Open your lunchbox, your brown paper bag, your igloo, whatever it is, look inside. What shared trauma do you have? Work with us, co-decolonize. Check it out. Engage your courage, your compassion, your generosity, your forgiveness. Let our breath create reflection and clarity in this moment. We can't stay here. We can't be stuck. Engage your own spiritual activism through your own co-decolonizing efforts in your own community. We don't have a vaccine for the after effects of colonization. We don't have that. But we do have is an opportunity to work with, for, alongside, in behalf of, and to benefit Black and indigenous communities of color that are disproportionately impacted. We're all traumatized. I invite you to process that shared trauma. And when you do work in a co-decolonizing space, you're saying to the communities, I see you. I see you. I see your suffering. I feel your suffering. I don't know your language. I don't know your community. I don't know anything about you, but I know you're suffering. I'm suffering too. I'm setting aside myself to join hands with you to make this place a better place. The Hopi elders tell us, we are the ones we've been waiting for. And I assure you, these are matters of life and breath. Gracias. Chavindo. Nya mihinui. Thank you.